Good morning, everyone. You join us again today for another one of our family vlogs. So it's myself, Jacqueline Benser, and my colleague, Sarah Pennicott. Good morning, Sarah.
Morning.
This is another vlog in a series that we're putting forward about later life divorce. And we're really pleased today to have a guest join us, and that's Ben Slater, who's from Nellie Supports. Good morning, Ben.
Morning. How are you?
Morning.
Very well, thank you. So Ben, as I understand it, you're an independent social worker, but you're also, is it managing director of Nellie Supports?
Yeah, so Nellie Supports is a private social work practice. We started 4 years ago, actually, in February. It's our birthday. We've got a team of 11 in our team now, with 5 social workers across the country, specialising in mental capacity and adult social care. So yeah, it's grown from me by myself running around like a lunatic to 5 of us running around like lunatics.
Really? And what's your national reach then? Are you able to cover all areas geographically?
Yeah, so we cover the whole of England and Wales. In some cases, we covered outside of the UK as well. We've done assessments in Saint Germain and a couple of little islands out in the Caribbean, actually.
Really?
Because of video link technology. So we have a bespoke telehealth system, so we can complete assessments via video link, which has opened it up to people across the world, actually. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I'm going to ask a really obvious question. I'm guessing Nellie Supports. Where does the name come from? Is it to do with memory loss? I don't know.
I'd love to say yes. It is completely to do with memory loss. It was fully designed in that way, but it wasn't. It was my wife. She likes elephants, and she came up with the idea of an elephant as a logo because they're family animals. It's part of being a herd. Coincidentally, they are supposed to have good memories, which kind of works with our mental capacity side of the business. And obviously, we're not allowed to mention Nellie the elephant because the punk rock band doesn't like us using that. But yeah, that's where the name came from, and we love our Nellie. She's lovely.
That's really lovely, very distinctive as well. I know that obviously we've had calls to instruct you in the past and fairly recently in relation to cases in which the issue of capacity, so somebody's ability to make decisions, and of course the decisions will vary, it depends on what decision-making process we're talking about. But we've found, Sarah, haven't we, in several cases it's arisen where either our client might have a suspected issue and need support and an assessment, or indeed the other party within the divorce or separation may be struggling. I know you've had a couple of cases with this being quite prominent, haven't you, Sarah?
Yes, yeah, and in some instances it's been where an issue has been raised perhaps by a family member that makes you question whether the particular client has capacity, and having completed the capacity assessment, that actually for the purposes of litigation they do have capacity, because as I'm sure Ben will say, it's a decision-based assessment. So it won't be necessarily that they have capacity for everything, but it could be that they have capacity for the litigation or for a particular perhaps transfer of a property or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, for us, the Mental Capacity Act, it's a beautiful piece of legislation because it's not about taking away somebody's rights. It's not about saying you're wrong. It's actually about protecting somebody's right to make decisions. So when we're assessing capacity, it is that decision specific. So somebody might be able to make a really simple decision, such as whether they want a cup of tea or coffee in the morning, but they can't make the decision on whether they need to live at home or whether they need to go and live in a care home to receive that additional support. But just because they can't make that really big decision doesn't mean that we should then take away their rights to make that smaller decision about, what foods they eat and what drinks they drink or what clothes they wear. And it's the same when we look at litigation assessment. It's very specific on that litigation. It can also be that capacity changes. We see people. We had one client that was quite unwell. The stress and she'd gone through some grief as well, which had impacted on her capacity. That doesn't mean that in 5 years' time, when her divorce had all settled and her mental health had improved, that she would regain capacity. And if she went through that same litigation again, actually she may have capacity for that. So capacity is decision specific. So literally depends on every decision that's made.
Yeah.
And it's also time specific, and that time is down to some people will go and see have got capacity in the morning, but they haven't got capacity in the evening because they're suffering with sundowning or something like that. And so we try to go to see people at the best time for them as well, to make sure that they have every opportunity they can to be able to make these decisions for themselves. Yeah.
I think one point you made there is really important, that we're not trying to take away their decision making, their ability to make decisions, because I think even where we have situations where somebody might not have the capacity to litigate, your assessments can say what input they can have. Because I think quite often people are daunted by the prospect of having a capacity assessment, and perhaps finding they don't have capacity because they feel like all power will be taken away from them, when in fact it's just about putting support in place for them to make sure the best outcome is achieved, and we take into account any issues they have with capacity.
Yeah, and as social workers, we're trained to work from what's called a strengths-based approach. So we look at what you can do as much as what you're needing support with doing. And even that, if somebody is able to understand the relevant information, but they just need a little bit of support to understand that information, or they need the information putting across in different terms. We recently did an assessment to write a will, and you could tell this lady understood it. She just needed a little bit of extra support to show that she understood it. So we used Jaffa cakes, and we laid out Jaffa cakes because they were handy and they taste nice. And we laid those out, and she was able to demonstrate that actually, one of these Jaffa cakes would be taken away in tax, and one of them would go to her daughter, and one would go to the other daughter. And it just made her able to understand what we were trying to put across in a more simple way, and she was able to evidence that understanding. So it's not just about going in and saying you can't do this, you can't do that. It's about saying, well, actually you can do this if you have this put in place for you. One of our most infamous cases, the lady would only say Babbage. I don't know where I don't even know what the word Babbage means. And her carer, when we walked in, said she hasn't got capacity. She understands everything, but she hasn't got capacity. She wrote her own will. She did lasting powers of attorney. She did absolutely everything because we put it across and we helped her be able to communicate the way she needed to communicate. So absolutely, it's about empowering people, not turning around and saying you can't do this. And I think even when people lack capacity, it's about saying, well, okay, let's get a litigation friend in place so they can talk to you, they can get your wishes and feelings, and they can get at least your view put across, even if you're not able to stand up in court and make those decisions.
Yes.
Yeah.
It sounds like you, obviously, with your expertise and experience, you guys are making it less scary and more approachable as a subject, because it's a big issue for a lot of people. Just even the thought of losing capacity is a stigma for a lot of people,
Absolutely,
and their families as well.
Yeah.
And I will say I've watched a couple of your episodes on your website.
I know.
And one in particular about buying the underwear from Marks and Spencer's, and I thought, I think I do understand this. It's about the process of decision making. And the whole thing of it not obviously being linear and not being so straightforward. It is so complex, which is why we need you with your experience and expertise to actually work out what's happening with that individual.
Yeah, and I think it's as complex as it needs to be.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it can be more complicated. We have a tendency to make decisions more complicated than they necessarily are. I had a lecturer at university, and he was talking about writing a dissertation. And obviously, when you're writing your dissertation, you come out with some absolutely insane title of I'm going to look at schizophrenia in 8 to 10-year-olds in North Dorset. And there's no information. You can't do that. It's too complicated. And he said what you have to do is simplify your idea, then simplify it again, and then simplify it again.
Yeah.
And when we look at a lot of decisions, actually somebody could make the smaller decisions that are involved in that grander decision. So if we can cut those decisions down, at least then they're able to make some of those decisions, even if they're not able to make the bigger decision. So we try to work with people. We try to put it across in language that most people generally understand. We only use social workers because we think, and I personally believe, that there's a way of communicating that's important, and actually that's what social workers do. It's kind of in the title, social. So we try to break down those barriers. We work with people. One of my clients that I went to see, she was a very young girl. She was very nervous. She was only 18 years old. I walked in, you could see she was terrified. She was waiting for a man in a suit to turn up. So I walked in. I was wearing a t-shirt and a jacket at the time. She was still slightly nervous. So I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot my pen," and I bumbled out back to the car and took my jacket off, walked in, and I've got tattoos all up my arms. Tripped over the step on the way in, sat on the floor because I told her it was more comfortable to sit on the floor. I'm 42, it's not more comfortable to sit on the floor at all. And all of a sudden, the power differential within that relationship changed. And then all of a sudden, she's more relaxed, she's more comfortable. And I can get a true representation of what she actually understands, rather than I think I need to tell him this. I think I need to tell him that. So we work with people on what's called a therapeutic basis rather than a clinical basis. We're not going in and just asking a list of questions. We change our assessment to fit with you. You know, some people going in and start asking about the finances involved in a divorce. If they're not going to understand the value of money, why start putting them under the pressure of how much is your solicitor costing you and things like that. So we take it very gently with people.
So in terms of the assessment, obviously, as you said, you kind of tailor it as the actual assessment goes along. But a lot of our clients, when it's difficult to raise the subject in the first place, that they might need the capacity assessment, but then they want to know more as to what it particularly involves, how long will it last, what are they expected, is it a test, and what sort of things do you think are good for us to say to them to reassure them that actually it's to put things in place to help them?
So under the law, it is a test. You need to be able to understand the relevant information. You need to be able to retain that information. Then you need to be able to use and weigh that information, and then you need to be able to communicate your decision. We say it's not a test; it's a conversation. You know, we don't sit there. We do sit there with a pad and paper because most of our social workers' memories are atrocious and can't remember what you're saying. And you know, what the client says is actually more important than what we think. But it is a conversation. You know, it's about getting to know that person, and then from there you can start to ask questions that are about their lives, which are associated with the necessary information that the official solicitor has stated, such as, you know, how is the court costs being funded and things like that. But you get to have those it becomes part of the conversation rather than a set list of questions. I'm always, you know, a lot of social workers say that they're fortunate to be social workers. And I always thought that was a little bit on the nose. But actually we are, because we do go across the country. We're invited into people's homes. They want us there for the most part. And we get to know these people. We've met Spitfire pilots, Olympic gymnasts, one guy that worked with on penicillin and helped create penicillin and saved millions of people's lives. You know, we get to see and be involved in these people's stories. So when we go out to do an assessment, I want to know you. I want to know your story. And the amazing people that do, you know, Spitfire pilots, they're just as amazing as the taxi driver that was evacuated to Cornwall in the war. You know, so we get to know people's stories, and through that we can then start asking them questions about their finances, about their divorce, about the litigation and things like that. But it's a lot more a gentle process and breaking down the barriers. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you had been doing more remote assessment when that's necessary. Does that work as well, do you think?
I think there are disadvantages to video link assessments. I think, so when the pandemic first hit, everybody jumped onto video link as the alternative. We decided that we needed to continue doing face-to-face assessments because we're there to support clients, and doing it purely over video link for some people wasn't the right thing. They needed you to be face-to-face. So following all government guidance and our own practice manager's policy that she wrote, we carried on doing those face-to-face assessments. We were also fortunate that we've got a telehealth system built in. So kind of like when you book a video link appointment with your doctor, you get the reminders and emails and things like that. And it's nice and simple. You click a link and it pops up. There's no logging in or anything like that like today. I think that there is downsides to video link. Somebody once told me that one of the biggest issues is you can't tell if somebody's under any undue influence, and there is that pressure. Somebody said that the best way to tell is to ask them to pan the camera around the room. I think that's kind of slightly absurd, to be honest, because if I'm abusing my mother, I'm going to have the intelligence to either leave the room or to avoid the camera. So when we are doing video link, we're open and honest, and we say to people, look, if there's somebody else in the room, you're allowed somebody else in the room. Just let them say hello, and we need to note down who they are. You're allowed somebody with you in an assessment, whether it's over video or whether it's face to face. So we found ways of understanding people's body language and things like that to overcome that undue influence. I still think face-to-face is always going to be better. And I would think over the next few years, the courts are going to put an emphasis on going back to face-to-face assessments, because we can support you better. We can do diagrams, and we can use Jaffa cakes and all of those things, and we can talk about your house. And when we see your living room, we can, who's the photo, this photo, well, that's your grandchild, or, what's your relationship with your grandchild. So we can build up a better picture of who you are. It's like you, Jacqueline, there's you're there, there's no background apart from your face and what you're saying. We can't really tell anything about you. So I think video link has got its place. We're seeing a decline in those since probably about October last year. But we are still doing video link assessments. I think they're there for forever. But I would argue that face-to-face is always going to be the more preferable option.
Yeah, sounds good. I've got personal family experience of dementia and the impact of it, and the fact that it, of course, it's not a linear situation. I'm presuming when you get to meet somebody and you're looking at all of those aspects, that if you're not absolutely convinced as to their position at the time, you're able to go back and build on that relationship. Because I think, as you said earlier, it may depend on the time of day, where they're at that particular point, that you may need to go back and revisit it to build up that relationship and understand that person.
Yeah, we try to not put too much pressure on people. So we do try to get the assessment done in one visit.
Right.
But there are plenty of occasions where it's become too emotional, especially when we're dealing with divorce, where we've needed to go back a second, third time, things like that. Sometimes there isn't a diagnosis. There's symptoms of cognitive impairment, but there isn't an official diagnosis. And the official solicitor is very keen on having evidence of that diagnosis, or evidence of that impairment, should I say. So all of our social workers are also cognitive assessors. So we can complete what's called a Montreal cognitive assessment, which is a test. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
It's a test. I always refer to it as a really bad pub quiz, because it is a little bit like that. And we try to make that as enjoyable as possible, but it does add into the capacity assessment and the time that it takes. So we see quite a few people that will go through the cognitive assessment, and then they're too tired. It's been too much for them to carry on with the capacity assessment, and we'll come back to do the rest of the assessment on another day. So if necessary, we go out a second, third time, and sometimes we identify that actually there's more support that we need to put in place. There's additional assessments, additional capacity assessments, things like that are necessary. Goes back to that decision specific nature of capacity. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And you mentioned there earlier about lasting powers of attorney, Ben. So obviously, as far as we're concerned, Sarah and myself are family lawyers. We regularly refer our clients to our private client team for wills advice and lasting powers of attorney advice. Lasting powers of attorney, or LPAs, tend to be the area that's quite often forgotten by a lot of people in terms of the need to look at it as soon as possible before you get to crisis point. So where do you guys come in with that?
So if somebody has already got a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, frontal lobe, anything like that, if somebody's elderly, I'd say over the age of 70, you could almost consider the golden rule for testamentary capacity over the age of 70 or has an illness. Then solicitors generally ask us to come in. We'll do a full mental capacity assessment for each one, because what we do see is people have got capacity for lasting power of attorney for finances, but the health and welfare one's just slightly too complicated, and they may not have capacity for that one. And it goes back to that promoting what decisions people can make. So if they can do the finance one, then fantastic. If they can't do the health and welfare one, at least they've got one and that they're able to do. And then we act as certificate provider and witness the signatures and all those kinds of things as well. One thing that all of our social workers do with lasting powers of attorney is we always do the financial one first, because we feel that the information around that can be actually easier to understand than the health and welfare one. If we think that actually this person can't grant lasting power of attorney, then we get enough information from them to be able to do what's called a COP3 assessment, a court protection assessment. So that way the family can apply for a deputyship order. So that way somebody can manage their finances. Because what we don't want is at the end of the assessment to go, no, you can't do lasting power of attorney for finance or health. There's our bill. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your life. What we aim to do is make sure that families have always got a way of moving forward, that there's always an option for them at the end of that assessment to be able to carry on supporting their family.
Thank you.
I suppose it moves on quite nicely from the health and welfare to the other aspect that you help us with, Ben, is care needs. So one of the issues that the court will always consider is the needs of the parties, and in later life that can be different to when you're younger. So absolutely. I know you created, you've completed care needs assessments for us within divorce proceedings, and that's something that you're able to
so we complete care assessments in line with the Care Act 2014, which is the same legislation that the local authority would assess somebody on to identify their care needs. So it looks at 11 domains, and I'm not even going to try to listen now because I can never remember them off the top of my head, but it looks at your whole being. It's a holistic assessment, so it looks at your medical needs as much as your social needs as well. So who your relationships are, your mobility, what are your health needs, embarrassingly for some people, your toileting needs. And when we say we look at these things, it's not just a case of saying a toileting's a perfect example. It's not just a case of saying, can you get to the toilet? Because everyone, and I've never met anyone that says, no, I can't get to the toilet by myself, because nobody wants to admit that they have difficulties in that area. But when you start asking, well, how do you get to the toilet? That's when somebody says, well, actually, what I do is I climb off my chair, I crawl along the floor, then I go up the stairs on my bum. And all of a sudden, well, actually, you know, let's look at a better way of supporting you with this. So we look at everything from, like I said, from right through from mobility, toileting, nutrition, healthcare needs, your relationships with family, with friends, because what can be missed is in any health assessment is, okay, we're making sure you're taking your tablets, we're making sure that you've got carers going in 4 times a day, but actually you haven't seen your family or your friends, or you haven't been involved in any community activity for a year, and then we start to see depression, anxiety, things like that to increase. So we always look at the social side of things as well. What community groups did you used to engage with? Well, would you want to engage with them now? And for Sarah and for divorce cases, we then cost all of that up, and we go out to providers, whether it's day centres or domiciliary care, nursing homes, personal assistance, and we cost up what we've identified. These are the needs. This is how much this is the care plan. This is what care you need. This is what support you need, and what your strengths are. Again, you know what you can do, and if you can do something, what help do you need to carry on doing that? And then we organise how much all of that would cost. So then Sarah can very cleverly go to the courts and say, this is how much Mr. Smith is required with. Yeah.
Yeah, so the benefit of those assessments is really twofold, isn't it? So for us to say these are our clients' needs, but also for the client to be able to improve their quality of life going forwards, or make sure that their needs are met.
Yeah, I mean, I used this word earlier. We do all of our assessments are what's called therapeutic assessments. So the idea is not about going in and saying, this is what you can't do this, you can't do that. It's about going through the assessment process itself should be therapeutic. So what I mean by that is, and capacity is probably the easiest way to explain it, is we go and see lots of people where the son says, no, dad has definitely got capacity. This is ridiculous. I don't know why we're doing this assessment. And we explain the legislation, we explain what having capacity actually means. And then we go through the assessment very gently with son in the room. And at the end of it, the son will turn around and say, well, actually, I agree. I don't think he's got capacity. And actually, I think I need to be putting more support in place and more help in place. So you've supported that, not just the client, but their family, to change their understanding of mum or dad's situation, to improve their lives. And it's the same with a care assessment. Lots of families don't want to admit that things are worse than they maybe are. And going through a therapeutic assessment, by the end of it, hopefully people will understand what mum can do or what dad can do, but also understand what support they need to put in place or what support they can actually do for them as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're actually providing not only the assessment and the outcome of the assessment, but it's a huge practical input that has a ripple effect for the family. It's really supportive.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, and this is why I'm so passionate about social work and social workers doing this, because I think, what social work can provide is a different skill set to what other professionals provide, and a different insight to what other professionals can provide. And I think that as we're seeing, there's 300,000 people in the UK currently waiting for a care assessment by their local authority. That's going to increase over the next 2, 3, 5 years, and it's not just going to increase by the amount of people that are applying for care assessments. It's going to increase because of strikes, because staff are leaving the profession because local authorities just aren't able to support their staff properly. So we're going to see an increase in this need for care assessments. What we're seeing at the moment is that families are going straight to domiciliary care providers. They're going straight to the residential and nursing care providers, and they're just saying, okay, your mum has dementia. Our standard package is 3 calls a day. There you go. We'll put that in place, and it's not necessarily the right care for them. They're not thinking about those social aspects of how is mum carrying on going to her church club, or carrying on going swimming or singing or dancing or any 100 other things. That it then becomes that clinical assessment of being focused on, these are her needs, how do we meet those health needs, and it can end up being more expensive. You're paying for 3 calls a day when actually you only need 2 calls a day.
Yes.
But that's a standard package as such. So it's about assessing the entire person and about identifying how we can best provide a good quality of life to them.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I've really taken from our discussion this morning. I think it's been incredible for me to speak with you and see how passionate you are about improving the lives of people in terms of care and supporting them and making sure that the right support is in place with the capacity assessments.
I mean, one of the first cases that I suppose got Nellie started, or one of the reasons. It wasn't a case that Nellie Supports that worked on it. It was one that I worked on a local authority, and I had a client that she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. She'd be in a mental health unit. She'd come out. She'd be perfectly healthy and fit, and everything would be going perfectly fine. Her family lived down in London. She lived in Lincolnshire, and she'd get carers going in 3 times a day. And after about 3 months, she would just not start taking a medication because she was feeling better. So she didn't need to take a medication. Then she'd miss a doctor's appointment because nobody was there to support her in getting to the doctors. And then after about 5 months, everything would have gone terribly wrong and she'd be back on a mental health ward. And after about 3 weeks of being given her medication and ensured that her care was appropriate again, she'd be back home, and we'd go through that again and again and again. The problem is with local authority social work is that as soon as there is no need for them, then your case is closed to that social worker. You are always open to the local authority, but you don't have a social worker anymore. So realistically, once somebody's gone out, had a care package organised and the care is working, then you lose your social worker. If you need them again, you're starting off at the list of that 300,000 people.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, sorry, Jackie. Were you
yeah. See, well, it's just such a huge area, isn't it?
Yes.
And I mean, I'd like to say, I think, as you said earlier, Ben, that you know, the numbers coming to you are you know, are quite high in terms of the volume, and obviously there's a need. There's a need for the work that you do. Yeah. We'd love to be able to say in a utopia that there isn't the need for that area of work, and we wouldn't experience it in our cases either. But it's a fact of life, isn't it? And with a growing older population,
absolutely, we're
it's there,
living.
Isn't it? And it's great that we have got you and Nellie Support to give us that guidance.
Thank you.
So that we can all work together as professionals to pull it together for our clients.
I think that for me, that's one of the best things about having an independent practice is we get to talk to you guys, actually. And we get to go to your conferences, and we get to understand the legislation and the law a little bit better. And we have a very good when in local authority in the NHS they talk about multidisciplinary teams. Our multidisciplinary teams are huge because we've got solicitors and work management and financial advisors and nurses and everything they have, but we also have these fantastic connections with people like yourselves, Jacqueline and Sarah, the solicitors and the paralegals and everyone else. So we feel very fortunate to be able to be in our position to learn from you guys as well, to be fair.
Yes, yeah. Well, Ben,
I think today has been a really helpful conversation for me, and to be able to tell clients more of what they can expect, your approach, or whoever's completing the capacity assessment, the approach, and that it's not a daunting prospect. It is about getting the help that they need.
Yeah. And I'm sure that we'll be.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Again, very soon, Ben.
No problem.
Thank you. Yes, I really appreciate that. I think Sarah and I, we've learned quite a bit as well, haven't we? So that we can help our clients a lot better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very grateful.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite, and I appreciate your time.
Okay, lovely to meet you, and take care.
Yes, thank you.
Take care.
See you soon. Bye-bye.